annual reports and accounts to run through, which Shane will take us through, and then on to the updates from committees. So there's a bit to discuss in some of them, but as I said, 10 to 3. Hopefully we'll look to aim to finish for around about 3:30 if we can, but let's see where it takes us. So Shane, over to you, annual reports and accounts.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And we've been through the annual report and accounts before at the board, and as you'll recall, it was then delegated to the committee, to audit committee, and therefore this is not coming here for us to then go back through the annual report and accounts and give comment. It is merely a technicality because it was delegated and it has now been approved and submitted, and what you have in your pack now is the final versions that were approved and submitted. So Chair, it's not for massive conversation, it's actually a mere technicality to come back to the board to say it was approved by the committee.
Okay, thanks Shane, but it is worth saying, if you have had a chance to go through it, it really does detail and explain the journey and a lot of the things that have been achieved in the last few years, and that's a big thank you to everybody sat around this table, because I don't think one partner on their own could have done any of this, and I don't think it's the ICB that has done any of it, has done all of this. It is the collective effort towards a shared endeavour, and a big thank you to everybody, because you've only got to read it to see where we've come from perhaps where we were a few years ago.
And if I may say then, Jeff, what would normally happen is that the organisation would then have an annual general meeting. We don't have to have annual general meetings, it's not actually in our constitution. We had one the first year, we had one in the third year last year. We're not planning to have one this year, Chair. The report is there to be read and it'll be on the web, there'll be other web content. But given the organisational changes that are going on at the moment and the insecurity actually in our organisation, to create an event that celebrates, you could say would be a good thing, but also from a resourcing perspective, we wouldn't have the capacity and resource, and we've shared this already, Chair, to create a big annual general meeting again. So we're not in breach of anything, and I would suggest our first cluster meeting next year will be where we'll reflect on 2 years.
And we've done a public to camera piece about the highlights of the annual report and the annual plan. So, so just comments from people really, questions? John?
Just a couple of very brief reflections, just as you say, went through the gym. I think it's just worth reading back what the external was said of the they said around financial sustainability. It's helpful, I think, to kind of hear. They said that we're the envy of other ICBs with whom they worked. It was really good to hear. They also commented on the strong system leadership and the government's arrangement around economy, efficiency and effectiveness. And their assessment of the accounts that were produced was that there were two very, very high standards, so again compared very, very favourably. And it was also, I think, underpinned by the annual head of internal audit opinion. And the headline outcome was the same, but the trajectory was far better. I think we cleared the bar less comfortably last year, and we've really turned that around. Nick Saunders, I know, has done a lot of work with the exec team, and we really reaped the benefit of that. So I think a lot of this can be kind of seen as dull but worthy, but I think absolutely excellent outcomes, and really I think kind of congratulations and thanks to everybody who's been involved.
Okay, thanks, John. And I think I'm not sure it's appropriate to single any one individual out, because I think it really is a team effort from everybody around the table here. So a big thank you. Any other comments or questions? Here comes the rain. I thought we had a sunny one today.
Jeff, if I may, just the many contributions from across the workforce, staff, colleagues in the ICB for their contributions. There's a lot of words in here that have been put together by a lot of people, if you like, on top of the day job. I know this is a requirement of us, but that look back is really important, so I'd just like to reflect that on that.
And Rob, I'll do a piece to camera afterwards where I'll mention that when we finish.
Really
okay, thanks. Okay, on to committees then. Ellen, do you want to start us off? Quality performance?
Thanks, Jeff. I covered most of it in the little bit of conversation we had on winter plan. I'll say a few words, then I'll pass on to Dave to talk about performance, and Joe, you might want to mention something on the medicine optimisation and the junior doctor strike that we discussed. So we met in July, we discussed the quality report as normal, we received the maternity national inquiry update, which you've heard today. We had the annual medicine optimisation report, and we also had a report on safeguarding governance, which it is generally a standing item for us. But our main focus as a committee was to offer challenge and scrutiny to the ICB on the winter plan. So I think Dave rehearsed quite a bit of what's currently going on. We were assured by the process that Dave put forward. We offered quite a bit of challenge in one, finding creative, innovative solutions based on our learning, which I think that was evident in Dave's report. But secondly, on delivery. One, the ability to deliver, and secondly, that the planning is there to allow us to deliver on the winter plan. So I won't go into that in any more detail. I've already mentioned that. I think I'm going to move on, Jeff, if we can, to Dave now, who's going to give us some update on performance, and then on to Joe.
Dave?
Great. So just a very brief summary of some of the key points within the performance report, which is in your packs to draw out some of the key points. The first page is a sea of green, which is good to see, but it is the summer, and we'd expect to see positive variance against those given where we are. However, to note within that, across the system, RTT or planned care performance continues to perform exceptionally well. Some challenges in cancer performance at the moment, notably around the urology and gynae pathways, but good plans in place within MBT to bring those pathways back within trajectory. In urgent care, you'll see strong performance over July with really good 4-hour CAP2 and there was positive no criteria to reside reduction in July as well. I might note that we did see an uptick in performance during the industrial action in July, where we get senior decision makers at the front door, so that will have had an impact. But I think to note, strong urgent care performance across June and July. To note on children's services, where we have been working very closely with Dominic and his team around improving access to CAMS services, and we are on target, on trajectory for our improvement position in the year, but we have been asked to further improve that position by NHS England, and we have submitted plans to do that. So just to note that is continues to be an area of focus for our system in children's services. Likewise within what's deemed as the community rates, but obviously significant ongoing challenge within ADHD and autism weights for children, and myself and Julie have been actively engaged with the team around some focused work to look at some further short-term actions to improve the position, whilst significant system transformation work makes its way through the system, and in fact business case coming to board, if not next month, then the month after. So I think I'll probably note those as the final area which I would want to draw note to, which Dominic's also referenced, is the increase in out-of-area placements for AWP over the summer. Dominic's already noted the increase in demand, but that increase in demand hasn't been matched by an increase in outward flow from services. So we are having a focused look at how we can better support AWP as a system, and by that I mean through the local authority partners at our performance executive meeting next Friday. But just to note, there has been that sharp increase in placements, which Dominic is certainly well aware of. So those are the areas I draw out.
Okay, thanks Dave. Joe?
Yeah, there are a couple of bits that I just want to call your attention to. there was some update on both infection rates and then backs and ins in the meeting. We are doing well with flu. Last year we did do well, but there's a national list that's just come into my inbox actually in this meeting. There is going to be an increased focus on flu as a way of sustaining staff through winter. We've also made some improvement in measles rate and MMR uptake, which is really good because everyone knows there's been a national downtick in that, and we seem to be able to be reversing that trend, and that's due to the way the system works together, including the backs and instruments across both our community providers, our community trust, general practice, coordinated by the ICB and led by my deputy Peter. The other bit I will bring your attention to, and it's just because this came to board, was the respect audit, and I think really thanks to Seema from MBTU HBW, who has worked really hard to look at the respect forms we do for people with sensory impairment, and that came on the back of a board presentation about 18 months ago, Shane, I think it was. And so we agreed to take it as an action to see, is there any sort of discrimination for people who have got a sensory impairment in how we enact the discussion about the respect forms, the documentation of the respect forms, which is the conversation you have in you're in the sort of people who've been identified in the last few weeks of life about your wishes about your end of life care. And both trusts engaged in that, and I'm really pleased to say that we didn't see any bias across either trust. Really openness and working that space. There was a few little bits about the forms could be a bit more complete. There's something about the completeness of the forms, but there was absolutely no indication, and we fed that back to Alan. I want to call you Brian, so Alan. And we've met with Alan, we've fed the audit report back, and it's just really to complete the change cycle. It's a very small area, but it's very important to that group that came to talk to us about sensory deprivation. So I just wanted you to have a look at that, as I think it was quite an important area. And then this isn't on the paper, but we did reflect on the resident doctors' strike. Managed very well, as always. It was quite last minute. A lot of the way things were done, the use of physicians' assistants changed, what you could do around the management of your workforce got changed last minute. Some of the documentation could come out the day before. So there was some lessons learned, and the big lesson learned for me was, as we did for the 2 derogations that we put through, asking for the ability to pour other doctors into the system, and the regional team has some very good tips about what a good looking form looked like, so we maximise our chance of success. As it was, neither trust needed to use those forms, although there were about 8 of them, but actually their resident doctors did come in and they did cover it. As far as I know, and people might have not, I don't think there's any indication that we're having another round of doctor industrial action that I've heard. But again, well managed, no safety incidents, a little bit of lessons learned in that process. I'm working over with our regional PRR colleagues to actually get what best practice looks like in the process.
Thank you, Jill. So comprehensive update. Any comments or questions? No? Okay, thank you. People Committee, Chair.
So, our work with physicians of we're continuing to monitor the use of temporary staffing, and there's a significant shift in agency values. We've had associated savings from that. The number of leaders available for staff this year is lower, so we have to be close to our
Can you speak up a little bit, Jay?
Yeah, so rain, Shall I say that again?
It's the rain, I think. No, go on, that's fine. But just,
Okay, so the really good protocol for the system has been finalised and agreed. It's now with partner CBOs before signing. It's been a good piece of work by the System 1 Workforce Group and in partnership with our trade union colleagues. Protocol, this is the one that enables staff who are placed at risk to have access to vacancies at wider recruitment, which is really important right now. And we also received a short update on the work and health agenda. We've had a great deal of information on that already with the 2040 work, but we're also a Workwell Vanguard site in partnership with the City Council. We're currently supporting about 1,000 individuals to access support towards being able to return to work. We'll receive a proper report on the phase 1 of that work for the next meeting. And we also had the most recent report from the Inclusion Council, and we'll get a proper report on that for the following meeting, especially in relation to inclusive recruitment.
Thank you, Chair. Joe, anything to add?
The only thing I would say is we also had a conversation about industrial action as part of our provider updates and sort of came to the same conclusion. It was noted, however, that obviously nursing colleagues have voted not to accept that pay award, so we wait for the outcome of that and any future implications in relation to that as well. So that was just by way of update.
Okay, thanks, Joe. Any questions on the People Committee? No? Okay, thank you. Steve, Finance States Digital.
Thanks, Chair. So I take the paper as read. A couple of bits that we just need to highlight. First of all, we're still projecting our break-even statutory requirements for both the ICB and the system. We know that there are risks within that, and we mitigate those risks, and we're tracking very carefully. Dave, you mentioned about the ADHD pressure that we've got there. We're tracking that really closely because that is the thing that could get us into some financial difficulty quite quickly. So we're monitoring that, and we'll continue to do that. There are some other movements, but they're balanced out more broadly within the finances at the moment. The meeting also, last meeting focused very heavily in digital, which is good for us to see. Some about our future look in terms of what we will need to have in play ready for the new world that we're going into. So that's been discussed both in Fed and then this morning in closed session. And also looking at the connectivity across two communities. So Deb, do you want to just say a little bit about that in terms of how we're mitigating some of our risks there?
In terms of working across Gloucestershire, so we're looking at things like GPIT is one of the areas that is a core consideration. So we're doing some joint working with Gloucestershire. They have a different approach to us, and obviously with the changes to the CSU, whilst we had in BMSG already had some plans to look at transitioning to a provider for our GPIT, the CSU closing down kind of means that we're in a much more significant and urgent environment to be able to make sure that we consider that. So we're looking at what that might mean across both, but we're also not ruling out the fact that we may do two different things because we are predominantly on two different GP systems. So that's something that we're going to be going through an expression of interest process to see which of our providers are interested in supporting that so that we find the best approach across the cluster. Were you going to mention collecting care?
No, you do carry collecting care. Yeah.
So also our shared care record, which is the primary space that our clinicians and our professionals go to look at the information that wraps around a person. So that's been in place now for a decade, and obviously we let the contracts a year and a half ago. We've been looking to transition that, so the SRO for that is transitioning from us in the ICB into Neil Darville, who is the joint CDIO for the Bristol Acute Group. There are some mitigations and risks and approaches around the finance that I think the group have mandated before they can consider it, that they want to make sure that we've got a whole load of risks that are indemnified by the ICB. We talked about those in great detail at Fed, and there's a letter that's gone to Neil this week signalling formally our intention, and that will come to Fed, come to the ICB board next month once Neil's had some conversations internally. I'm sure you're aware already, Maria, once he's had some conversations internally to work out what risk appetite the organisation has to be able to take that on. The reason it's really important is that this is a primary user service. This is about clinicians using it. The only reason the ICB and the CCG before it owned it was because no one could agree in partnership. So what we're hoping is we're able to step into a different place with some of our providers starting to own that partnership arrangement and manage risk in a different way to the way in which it's been with the ICB to date. So we're hopeful that that will take place.
And the important bit is that what we're trying to do is obviously get ourselves in the position when we do the transition next April that it's all smooth, and where we can move things, we've moved them and got those all nailed down. So it makes sense to do this sort of activity now.
And it's a really good example of, at the moment the ICB convenes all of these things, it's a really It's an important part of our infrastructure, but it's a first step into one of our provider partners taking that responsibility of managing on behalf of local authorities, on behalf of all organisations across the system. So there is some learning in there, and it will probably help us for other transitions that we need to do as we go forward.
Okay, thanks, Debs. Any comments? Steve, any more?
No, that's it.
Okay, great, thank you very much. Alison, primary care.
Thanks very much. We've got the June and the July minutes. The June minutes I reported verbally last time we met, and it showed one of the highlight reports for primary care. We had an extra open session we were asked to look at in July on the pharmaceutical needs assessment, which is a statutory requirement by Health and Wellbeing Boards every 3 years, and it's part of the regional assurance on public health. And to give our thoughts to the consultation. Really, the pharmaceutical needs assessment was for the whole of BNSSG. Joe took on the lead exec role and will ensure, I'm sure, that we have responded to the consultation. But there's lots of really important information in there and data which tells us stuff. And three things we said at committee. We encouraged the connections. There was definitely connections to urgent care. There's connections to the housing strategy that Tim James shared with us quite recently. We definitely, as a committee, wanted the lens of health inequalities to be a focus. So it was quite helpful to have that sort of input. The pharmaceutical needs assessment didn't show any gaps in our patch at all, and the assessment looks at current provision of pharmacy, any gaps, the demography, the choice and any cross-border services. But what we saw as committee were lots of opportunities for how pharmacists can support us. So it was really interesting to see. We wanted to see that the connections are made, and there will be a response going back from the ICB.
Okay, thanks, Alison. Dave, anything to add?
No, nothing to add.
Any questions for Alison or Dave? Primary care? No? Okay, thank you very much. Strategic health inequalities, the minutes have been circulated. 2 items I draw to your attention there, which probably demonstrate the value of this committee, although it's an additional responsibility. The first is Deb's team and talking about health inequality from a digital perspective. So all the stuff, Steve, you mentioned earlier on, that was I thought a really useful session when we did that in that committee, Deb, because it gave a different perspective, didn't it? And similarly on the other item around research engagement. So whilst we are a lead in light in research in BNSSG, I think the challenges that came in from that group around where is that research being pointed at, how are you going about doing it, and one of the key things that came out from people, particularly in our global majority or minority ethnic communities, saying they were taking a lot of stick within their communities because they were seen as the advocate for doing research in the community, when actually they were just part of the community trying to make it happen. So how we actually go about our research, really, really important, and I think that came across as something I don't think we would have considered from other perspectives. So it does give us a different perspective on how we look at the way we organise our services. So I thought it was very good. Joe, you were not the last one, but because you were in Gloucestershire, but anything to add?
One bit in the minutes you got for, there is a link to, it's a very small lecture that was done here in the Blackwell Institute from Tricia Greenhill, which talks about digital inclusion. And it's a ethnographic piece of research. I would really recommend watching it because it expanded my knowledge about what digital exclusion was, how it affects people, and the nuances within it. And some of the assumptions we make about, especially community care and general practice, about where they're making choices about not to adopt digital, and actually that permission needs to be there because it doesn't suit all communities. And this is about rurality actually, but it's a really good watch. And if you've got anything rural, if you're doing appraisal of it, I highly recommend it. And then the research engagement network tensions have been really real in RSB, and we're in the #1 research active area in the country, and we've put a lot of energy into this, and it's a really difficult balance. And I know answers this, but Paul, who leads it, is so aware of being the white saviour, the power he has as the white man leading the group, and then these tensions within the different communities, different ethnicities. and actually the different cultures even within saying this, all of that has bubbled up and it got very difficult, and we're still not through it, but there was some really interesting learning for us about how we do this in a much more sophisticated way, in part because we probably do talk about this in a little bit of a reductionist way, if we're honest. So there is some learning in that space as we work it through.
I think for me, Joe, it has demonstrated by dealing with it as a separate committee, you do get the time and you do get the contribution, which means you look at things very differently. So it does add value, and I know it obviously you have to put the effort into it, but it has a different, it just has a different feel, doesn't it, to some of the conversation at our other committees, which are generally, there's an awful lot on the agenda. There's probably a bit less on the agenda in the Health and Equalities Committee, but it goes quite deep. So, Deb?
Yeah, it was just to say the digital inclusion piece, whilst it might feel like one of those small activities that kind of doesn't always make it onto the agenda, when we start to think about where the shift is, it becomes much more important, and the whole idea of it becoming an embedded part of how we strategically commission alongside health inequalities is really important. And then the other piece, to your point, Jeff, and this was a point that Shane made at our execs this week, when we received the health inequalities report, the annual report, and Steve and I have talked about how we make sure that FED, and I'm sure others would be doing the same on other committees, is, as you've said, it gives you a lens to understand how you make the decisions. So what Steve and I talked about is that when we're making decisions about digital or estates or finance in FED, that the whole committee is aware of the things that we know about health inequalities, because some of that was incredibly stark. So just making sure that we do that bit about the embedding.
And interestingly, I don't know if Joe would support this, but there's been times in that committee where people are quite dry-mouthed about, I never even thought of that, and you think, blimey, after everything we've done over all the years, but just because it threw in a completely different perspective on things. So that's the, not just the consultation with members of the public, that's about involving them in your governance and the conversation. It was very rich. So, Jane?
Just to add on the digital outcomes that are held on research, because we're talking about devices and phones and contracts. A lot of that research has been done, and those lessons have been learned in one sector. They're very transferable into what we're doing now, because it's just the device that people use to be able to interface with us, and that data's there. So it's worth having a look.
And then the other point I'll make, Steve, Paul's been working with your lead on racial equity and shared some of the UE documents about how you're approaching that. And I don't know whether there is an opportunity for some shared learning in that, but they're fantastic documents. So again, whether we might want to bring that together at another point, maybe a development session, but they're really good, aren't they? So.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments on the Chief Health and Equalities Committee? Okay, then we move on then. Audit and risk, John.
Thank you, Joe. All main business obviously with us again. Just three very, very big points. It was the final meeting for Grant Thornton, our external auditors, so I just would want to place on record my thanks to them. We received the near final data security protection toolkit. It was due for imminent submission, and there were a number of things that were being worked up around compliance, but they were all subsequently satisfactorily closed off, and we submitted a clean outcome. And the final one was just that we received the counter-fraud annual report, which was clean. All components were green, which again was really positive to see. Good outcome. So thank you.
Thanks, John. Any questions for John around audit and risk? Okay, thank you. Special Services Committee, Dave.
I'm afraid I haven't been yet, Chair. We're going to the first meeting next week. I'll let you know then. Joe, looks like you went for the last one? No?
Is there anything to update on it? It's a standing agenda item. It's not a committee of the board as such. Okay. Shane, nothing you want to know?
It is a subcommittee of the board as per our standing financial instructions, and actually was one that we will bring formally back into the board once Dave has been to the first of the meetings.
Okay, all right. Let's hope it happens before we don't exist. Integrated care partnership updates. I mean, this is an interesting one, because as we move towards clustering with Gloucestershire ICB are their health and wellbeing board. They're one and the same thing because they're coterminous. We're obviously not. We've got 3 local authorities, and the chairs of our health and wellbeing boards sit in our integrated care partnerships. The ICP, as it was prescribed in the original legislation, was about setting the strategy for us locally. and it's been really helpful in that. The discussion gets quite rich, I think, and the one thing that is a concern for me is because ICPs are unlikely to be prescribed in the new world, about how we make sure that we have connectivity across our local authorities in the conversation on health and social care. So we will obviously engage with health and wellbeing boards in each of our local authority areas, but there's been a richness in bringing together local authority leaders and lots of others who wouldn't be sat here in that environment. Now, I think we need to talk through if it exists going past, well, a change in legislation, what does it look like? So we've got a board, we've got an ICP discussion, I think it's next week or the week after, which is going to be a seminar session really to thrash some of this out. So myself and Shane were at the pre-meet this week, but to get a sense of what ground can that occupy, but it's back to that one of, if we don't have the conversations and relationships there, where do we have them collectively? So previously when we were at an STP, we used to have a chairs and chief execs group where we met, and then obviously when we split into an ICB, the chief execs end up here and the chairs are invited to the ICP. There's a danger that chairs and leaders of health and wellbeing boards or chairs of health and wellbeing boards don't have a forum where they come together and have the conversation. So then they are completely reliant on what you bring back or what you would have brought back from an ICB into the conversation for your boards. And I actually think having sat in that chair's seat as provider, it's really important that you're having that conversation, because when me and Shane sit in a room, I guess 95% of the time we hear the same things and we're like-minded. But there's times when I hear different things to what Shane hears, and you miss things. And I think we really need to figure that one out. I don't think it's going to be prescribed for us. I don't think there'll be a requirement to do it. But I think we will lose something if we don't have, not necessarily the agenda of the ICP, but the membership. So I don't know what you think.
Yeah, I mean, we've had conversations as chief executives of ICBs about the future, because quite clearly the health and wellbeing boards are a statutory instrument and a really important statutory instrument. But actually our boundaries or our borders are not one health and wellbeing board, there'll be 4 health and wellbeing boards. So there is a model that suggests actually we should have a joint health and wellbeing board where all 4 come together. That's not quite what the ICP was. It doesn't bring chairs in, it doesn't bring the VCS in. So we've got to explore what do we want. The ICP as a concept is not going to be in the future. It's clear that the health and the 10-year plan says so. But the functions that it carried out, we need to find a place in our new architecture. So we're having that, I think it's next Thursday afternoon, I think it is, to begin to understand, well, if we just had health and wellbeing boards, what would be missing? And actually, is there a place to create an overarching strategic engagement space? And that could be a joint health and wellbeing board with additional non-executive members being part of it. So it's up in the air. The irony, of course, is the 22 Act doesn't actually give us any guidance anyway. No. 22 Act says you should have an ICP and it should be a subcommittee of a board. That is it in the 22 Act for what an ICP should be. So we have freedom in this space.
And that's going to be a really important discussion next week, because I get a sense from some of our local authorities they're keen to have their own health and wellbeing board and just that. And we will miss out on that richer conversation. And so when we get to things like winter plan, it gets harder when you're not brigading people. You might have an exec level, but if we're not doing it across the governance level as well, it becomes a lot harder. So we'll keep you updated on that one. I think it's a really good group of people there, isn't it? You know, and I think Fiona's there. I'm trying to think, anyone else on the ICP? Joe is there, Rosie. But it's a different conversation there. We're more transactional here, We're more engaged in the direction of the business, and the ICP is something different. But it also builds relationships. Ellen?
Yeah, I just think it's so important, Jeff, that equally, I'm just interested in what Maria's got to think about, the future of the ICB or our local authority partners. We've achieved such a great working relationship that's key to delivery of health and social care, that, it feels that it just needs to sort of continue in some sort of in some sort of committee or guise or whatever. And I'm just wondering whether you've sort of spoken to your colleagues, the providers, and what the feedback's been, Shane?
Well, there are some on the
Yeah.
here today. I think for me, when I've spoken to them, the ICP was a space, to begin with it was a little bumpy, best way to describe it, but it became a space where we could actually seriously have conversations at a system level. And I think what people want to hold on to is the value that brought, but just very conscious that the new world, health and wellbeing boards take on a much stronger view in that space. So we could
easily get driven into silos, couldn't we? Because if you look at the ICB, tell me if I'm wrong, but I can't think of another board that has all the key chief execs across the system in health and social care in one room.
Yeah.
We do it in isolation and we have separate conversations, but the three chief execs of the local authorities, the chief execs of all our big providers, primary care, I suspect there's not another board like this. Well, I know there's not another board in our footprint that brings together the most senior leaders to be having a conversation about our service provision in the public. It's done in a different way. Not even WECA does it in the way that I think we probably do. Now, that's going to go. So we want to have partners on the ICB, but then we could lose the ICP as well. And we are determined, I think, and I'm speaking for Shane as well, because I think we're in agreement on this, that the one thing that we've really had over the last 3 years is a building up of relationships, a convening of system conversations, where we just become more collegiate in the way we look at things. And so rather than pointing the finger at each other, this has been a place where we've tried to get people into a mature conversation about how we work together. Now, we were not there before, and we could easily go back to where we were before quite quickly. So the ICP, I think, is going to be an important part of that. They're not going to have a very fixed agenda, but it's still a convening space. Jo?
Yeah, it's just, I don't want to over-complexify things, but there is a bit of a paradigm shift happening as we go into these changes, and that's being exemplified.
Can you speak up a bit?
I think we're in a bit of a paradigm shift in this moment, because you've also got an introduction of neighbourhoods and a neighbourhood approach. And we were talking yesterday about the reversal of the leadership paradigm, where it isn't a group of leaders coming together to guide the system, it's a group of listeners listening to their people and their communities at place and enabling the system to go in the direction as enacted by their communities, with the neighbourhood structure being key to that. So wherever we go to into the next iteration, there's got to be that organisation of those localities and the people at place, and what does that look like? Because we can't just go back down where we were, because there is an inversion happening, I think, in way of how power is being described.
I wouldn't necessarily disagree with that, but I don't think we've ever led the ICB in a way that has been about system leadership. It's been about system collegiate, collective, bringing together of views, and not a power relationship. So I don't think it's ever been a top-down. You can tell me I'm wrong. We've never tried to run it as a top-down approach. You're absolutely right, Jo. I think the voice from our communities can be more coordinated in the way that we do that. So, and the ICP I think has played an important part in that. Because when I've gone to that, I've heard a very different view than the ICB. We get more work-related. The ICP tends to have, I wouldn't say blue sky thinking, but it tends to be a less transactional approach around it, doesn't it? You know, in the conversation.
And we can hear the voice.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Steve.
We have to find a balance, so that some of that blue sky innovative thinking we absolutely need. But we also need to make hard decisions in a resource envelope that is getting tighter and tighter. So bottom-up's great, but bottom-up tends not to worry about what's the resources.
Yeah.
We have to find a way of balancing that off. Because you ask a load of people what they want, you'll be surprised when they come back with a very long list.
Yeah, absolutely.
We've got to make some judgment calls in that space, informed by what they're saying and what we're seeing.
So I think it's worth updating people on it. I think there's a lot of conversation to go. I think the aim is not to lose the good things that have happened through integrated care systems as we move forward, and try to cling on to that whilst accepting the structures will change.
Can we find some way of getting commitment towards some kind of systems function with those partners while we're around the table? Is there something that we can do on a macro kind of...
I think when we start having the conversation about IHOs, that will drive some of that. But
I think when we get into designing both governance, system governance and operational, we're not letting system go. Simple as that. It works, but it'll be a different approach, a different form of commissioning, but we are not letting system go. We're not going back to vertical towers of healthcare. We're simply not going to let it happen.
Well, we'll do our best. But that was back to the point about governance with the region. It's very difficult for people like Richard and the NHS director when they're getting a direct line coming in from a national perspective, which doesn't consider what's happening on the ground, and it doesn't consider the needs of our community, because it hasn't got the conversation.
It's also going to be critical. So if the government really gets serious about local devolution, then we need to be thinking about what's happened in Manchester and what do we want here. Because we've shied away in the weapon territory, we've backed away from, not we necessarily, but they have backed away from doing anything in that health and social care space.
And I think we're having more conversations, Steve. I mean, I know I have, Shane has, in different aspects. So I think the current mayor is a bit more receptive to that. Time will tell, but I think there's an imperative from the centre to make sure that elected mayors have more of an engagement, say.
And one small point that highlights that, the mayor is a co-signatory on our 3 pilots for neighbourhood health, and therefore, once they're approved, which they will be, Richard, once they're approved by the NHS, we've tied WECA into that.
Great.
Okay, I said 3:30, we're bang on. We've got one question from a member of the public. She's not with us, and I don't think, apart from Colin, I don't think we've got any other members of the public with us. So the question from Jeanette Moxham around hypercholesterolemia, is that right?
I'll look at it, yeah.
Okay, which is
I'm glad Rob helped you there.
which is about early onset of high cholesterol for the lay person. And we've got a response to send back. I don't propose we read out now unless you need to.
Yeah, we will get a response and we will send that out through the customer services team, and we will make sure that's minuted in the next round, in the minutes of this meeting.
So it's just about how we engage the system with it. Any other business? Anything for anybody else? Okay, so can I remind